of the post on X, which was formerly Twitter, supports Donald Trump's campaign. And a right-wing activist group's reliance on evangelical churches for Republican get-out-the-vote efforts could land the congregations in hot water with the IRS. Turning Point Action, founded by conservative provocateur Charlie Kirk, has held GOP vote-chasing events with at least 22 churches in 6 swing states since March. Turning Point's push to contact people likely to support former President Donald Trump to encourage them to vote may be crossing a line between church and state. And Vice President Kamala Harris has made it official. She will spend election night at her alma mater, Howard University, one of the preeminent historically Black colleges in America. That means the staff of the student newspaper, The Hilltop, and students at the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film are fastidiously preparing to capture history as it unfolds on that unique college campus. And with nearly 60 million ballots already cast, everyone interested in the presidential election is trying to figure out where the race stands. Despite so many votes having been cast, it is hard to know what it means. Many people have yet to vote, and exactly how many votes there will be or how they will split are unknown. But there's one measure in the early voting data that could be more suggestive about the final results. That is the number of new voters who have already voted. An NBC News Decision Desk analysis of state voter data shows that as of October 30th, there are signs of an influx of new female Democratic voters in Pennsylvania and new male Republican voters in Arizona, 2 of the most important swing states. That's the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in Real Time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in Real Time, and this is the hour where we go a little deeper, where we dig behind the headlines and bring you the stories that people are talking about. Well, one of the biggest stories, obviously, is the election, and why are the polls showing the 2 candidates to be pretty much in a dead heat, particularly in the battleground states? What is driving some of these new Democratic voters, particularly female voters, out to the polls, and what might drive even additional numbers of women to vote in this election cycle? Well, you ask that question of some voters, they'll tell you it's the fight over abortion. It's the fight over the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. In this hour, we're going to be talking to Karen Cohen. She's a staff attorney at the UCLA Law Center on Reproductive Health, Law, and Policy. And Erica Castro, she's the director of organizing for Plan Action Nevada, which is part of the Yes campaign for the ballot initiative to protect abortion in Nevada. Thank you both, Karen and Erica, for joining me. The issue of abortion, obviously really big, has been a big part of VP Harris's campaign, big part of her push in these final days. So, Erica, what are you seeing in Nevada in particular? I was actually in the battleground state of Nevada about a week and a half ago, talking to voters, and quite frankly, it seemed like people were pretty split between Trump voters and Harris voters. Now we're down to about 4 days before the election, and I suspect that voters that were undecided have pretty much made up their mind. So you've been on the streets in Nevada more recently than I have been. So what are you seeing and hearing from Nevada voters?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on, having Plan Action here. Like you said, we are on the ground talking to voters. We've been doing it for a minute now. We started early in the year, talking to them about the issues, and then, turning over and talking about the candidates, and now making sure that they actually go out and vote. And some of the top issues we're hearing from folks is definitely abortion. They want to make sure that as a state that when Roe fell, we still had those protections here. They want to make sure that regardless of who is elected, they continue to have those protections here in our state. And then additionally, they're also talking a lot about the cost of living, inflation. People are seeing that their rents are going up, and they're concerned what that means for them when they're planning for families, when they're having children. The cost of utilities is also something that they're concerned about. And yeah, they're also paying attention to the federal raise and where the federal candidates, specifically Trump and VP Harris, stand on the issue of abortion. And for them, having access to abortion is critical. Making sure that they have those protections enshrined into our constitution is critical. And I think that is going to be one of the things that gets them out this election cycle.
But as you talk to voters, I didn't get the sense that there were more voters in Nevada. Of course, it was a very small sample size, not scientific, so I don't want to exaggerate my experience. But I didn't get a sense there was an overwhelming number of voters supporting Kamala Harris because of her stance on abortion. Is that what you're seeing on the ground?
Well, when we're talking to them specifically about question 6, which is the reproductive justice ballot initiative, we're hearing about 85% of the people that we're talking to that they're going to be voting yes on question 6. I think additionally, the reason why they are supporting Harris and they're connecting it back to reproductive justice is because we know that if there is a second Trump administration, he's going to have the opportunity to appoint 2 new Supreme Court justices. And that is actually going to continue to impact our rights, not only around abortion, but anything else, especially for communities who are often marginalized. So I think for some of these voters, yes, they're thinking about the presidential candidates, but they're also thinking about what that means for SCOTUS in a Trump or a Harris administration. So for us, when we're talking to them about the ballot question 6 and reproductive justice, we're hearing about 85% of them that are supportive of it.
So is it Catherine or Katrin? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
It's Catherine. Thank you so much for having me.
So Catherine, if what Erica is saying is true, and if that were the case all over the country, why is the race so close?
Yeah, so, as you have both said, abortion is one of the major motivating issues in this election. We're seeing it being a top 3 issue, particularly for women, and the number 1 issue for this population of women aged 18 to 29 that you've been talking about are showing up and registering in greater numbers. We also have a number of ballot initiatives like the one in Nevada. There is a question of how much the support for these ballot initiatives translate into these more partisan races, because the truth of the matter is that abortion is incredibly popular with all voters. There are basically no demographics in the United States that the majority support a complete abortion ban. And that is pretty much what is at risk with a future Trump presidency. And so what we're seeing is that some people are voting separately for abortion or partisanship, but that abortion, when it's directly taken to the voters, is motivating and maybe isn't necessarily translating.
Right, but I guess that's not making sense to me. If you're telling me overwhelmingly people are in favor of some abortion rights, whether it's some of the rights like you might have in a state like California or others that it could be more restrictive, but overall there is support for abortion, and people understand that Donald Trump appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who are responsible for overturning Roe v. Wade. He brags about it. He makes no bones about it. We know that Republican legislators have been the ones driving the very oppressive and restrictive abortion laws. So I'm just trying to better understand, how are people voting to support abortion, but not voting for Kamala Harris, and she's the only candidate saying that she's going to hands down sign into federal law, if there's if it's passed by Congress, a right restoring, or a federal law that would restore our abortion rights, or abortion rights across this country.
I think there's 2 things. One, we've been talking about, the number of swing states, and in the first hour you talked about it can be a matter of, a couple of hundred or 1,000 votes in specific counties. And so the widespread support for abortion may not translate to the Electoral College and where the kind of swing states are that are going to impact the election. The other thing you're seeing is that Republicans are really trying to distance themselves from these very severe abortion bans, and that is unfortunately working in some places. As you just said, Donald Trump unequivocally has taken credit for overturning Roe v. Wade. He appointed those justices. If he was elected again, he'd have an opportunity to appoint even more anti-abortion Supreme Court justices that would make it difficult for us to do anything even congressionally to support the right. But Republicans are trying to moderate in their messaging. Trump is now claiming he would veto a national abortion ban. And there's been an effort, kind of, you see up and down the ballot, trying to seem like that Republicans are moderate on abortion. You see this in the way they talk about it. There has been a shift from talking about a national ban to some sort of national floor or national standard, which is just another way to say ban, but it sounds more palatable. And really what you have here is a Republican Party that spent years using abortion to get people to vote. That was a very large motivating issue for their base. And now that they've accomplished overturning Roe v. Wade, and people are seeing the implications of that nationwide and seeing, I might have thought that I was opposed to abortion, but I really don't like the way that it's impacting maternal health, or I never thought it applied to these kinds of medical procedures. They are now trying to distance themselves from these very extremist bans. And that messaging is unfortunately not necessarily being understood by voters.
Do you see that, Erica? I mean, that gives me, that's logical. That makes sense, that people don't believe that the only candidate in the race that will restore abortion rights or prevent further eroding of those rights is Kamala Harris. So if they've heard messaging from Republicans that no, Donald Trump doesn't support, a national ban, and he's going to allow the states to decide, or he's going to allow there to be some, minimum time period in which you could have an abortion, then I could see somebody that's more conservative saying, okay, well, I'll vote for him. Because he's not going to, totally erode the rights to abortion. Are you seeing, is that the justification, Erica? Are you hearing and seeing that on the ground in Nevada?
Yeah, I definitely do think that could be part of it too. I think the other piece too is people are thinking about this issue holistically too. We saw this in 2022 when we did have a split ballot here in Nevada. So our governor actually lost, and then we still held some of our supermajority in the assembly. And a lot of that comes from the fact that people are feeling the pinch of the economy. They're feeling the pinch of inflation. So they're not only looking at reproductive justice on whether they can have an abortion or not. They're also thinking about how they're going to raise their families. How are they going to plan for those families to be able to thrive in the communities that they live in? And I think they can see through some of the flip-flopping that we've seen the Trump administration or the Trump campaign do. But I think part of the conversations that we're having, because we canvass a lot of people of color, Black communities, Latino communities, Indigenous folks, they're looking at this holistically. And they're also thinking and taking into account, what are some of these folks going to do with the cost of living, with the cost of utilities, groceries, rent, all of those things, because the reality is that they're feeling those impacts. So when we're talking to folks, they are supportive of the reproductive ballot question, but they're also questioning what are some of these politicians going to do to make sure that if we do choose to have kids, that they're going to have a roof over their heads, that they're going to make sure that they have adequate education, and that we can also live in a planet that's going to be sufficient for us.
Okay, but let me ask you this, Erica. So on those questions of the economy, are you saying that when they look at this holistically, not just the right to an abortion, but the right to, the ability to, as you say, take care of a child, to provide housing, are they then saying, I believe under Donald Trump that he's going to be better for me on these issues of the economy?
I mean, I think that unfortunately under the Trump administration, he had a good economy because the former administration, which was President Obama, left them in a really good place. And there's unfortunately also been a lot of mis and disinformation from the Trump campaign that they maintain a good economy. So there has to be that we have to do a lot of education with voters to really explain what that process looks like, some of the policies that actually the Trump administration passed during his term that actually is impacting us now. So I think for us, it's a lot of education. It's a lot of long conversations with people at the doors to really get them to understand not only what the federal campaigns mean for us, whether that's the presidential or the congressional ones, but also what the local ones mean. Because at the end of the day, when we're thinking about city council, county commissioners, state legislators, those are the ones that are also going to have a direct impact in reproductive justice and housing reform, making sure that our schools are fully funded. So for us, when we're talking to voters at the door, we're talking to them about the entire ballot. And part of that is reproductive justice, but also making sure that they understand that Harris campaign or Harris presidency isn't going to solve all of our problems. It has to be different levels of government, and that's why we have to vote down ballot.
Are you seeing, Catherine, that as well, that this question of reproductive health, reproductive justice is being tied to the question of the economy, and that Donald Trump, because of lies and because of disinformation and people's short memories about the economy during the pandemic and how horrible the economy was, and the horrible economy that Barack Obama inherited when he became president in 2008, that people are giving Donald Trump credit for an economy that he did not create, and definitely not remembering that he actually wrecked the economy because of the way he poorly handled the pandemic. But are you seeing that issue of the economy being wrapped into this conversation about reproductive health, and people saying, well, yeah, I think abortion is great, but on the economy, I think he's going to be better, so I'm going to vote for him, even if it means restricting abortion rights?
I do think that is impacting the way that people are voting. I think a lot of people feel very passionately about their rights to abortion. And as we've kind of been talking about, though, there's a lot of misinformation about what a Trump presidency might mean for that. This message that all the overturning of Roe did was bring it back to the states has been very much absorbed and adopted. And the truth of the matter is that a federal administration under President Trump could ban abortion in many ways. They don't actually need to even pass a congressional act. They could do it through enforcement of zombie laws. We can talk a little bit about that. But people seem to think that like the status quo in their state is going to maintain, or their state is the one who has the ability to control their access to abortion. And the economy and inflation has been, cited as kind of the top issue that a lot of voters have. I mentioned abortion is third. But so for people who are really voting based on, economic concerns, they may feel that their abortion rights are not going to be impacted at the federal race. And I think the Republican Party has done a good job like trying to argue that. And it requires, like Erica mentioned, a lot of education on the, nitty gritty of how the government functions, on talking about the Supreme Court, talking about, Project 2025 and things that Trump has also tried to distance himself from, that do have a blueprint for banning abortion, but that message, that Republicans have been able to sort of run away from that message.
So both of you have talked about long conversations. I've been out on a battleground state tour, knocking doors, talking to folks, and I do voter engagement events. I did voter engagement events in the battleground states, and a young man last night in North Carolina talked about the time. And at this late date, 4 or 5 days before November 5th, how realistic is it that canvassers, can have those kind of long conversations? And how many people, realistically, how many voters do you really believe have not made up their minds about both of the candidates, given how intense this election has been? I'll ask you, start with you, Erica. Does your group and the folks who are out on the streets, the kind of misinformation and disinformation that so many people have, not just on abortion rights, but on the economy, on immigration, on so many of these hot button issues, I found myself spending 30 minutes with people and still not having enough time to undo the damage that had been done to them by, the echo chambers that they may find themselves listening to.
Yeah. Honestly, I think this is why we do this kind of work year round, whether it's an election cycle or not. We're constantly doing community education, engagements. We do things like issue cuts where we're focusing on specific issues and really digging deep into that. So we started talking about these issues with folks and voters specifically since the beginning of the year. And you're right now it's a little bit harder to have those in-depth conversations. But at the beginning of the year, we did some deep canvassing, been talking to folks, having those long conversations. We also had another program, which is our relational organizing program, where we train leaders, where we train volunteers to talk to their friends and family about the importance of the election so that they can spend a little bit more time digging into those issues. Right now, we've actually identified most of the voters that we need to make sure to get out and vote this election cycle. So we feel confident that the voters that we've been able to identify, that we know that are supportive of the ballot question, and then the candidates up and down the ballot that we're supporting, we're really focusing on getting them out to vote this election cycle. So that's kind of our focus for the next few days. But the importance, I think, in the work that we do is that these are conversations that are happening year round. They don't happen, sometimes the Democratic Party, unfortunately, kind of comes in at the last minute and having these conversations. But as community organizers, organizations like Plan Action, we've been on the ground all year, even last year, even when Roe fell, we were having these conversations with leaders. And even after the election, we're going to continue to have those conversations because the legislative session happens in Nevada in February. So even if, knock on wood, we have another Trump presidency, there are things that we could do here locally to make sure that we are protected. So we will continue to have those conversations regardless of what happens this election.
So at this point, you feel confident that if you turn out the voters that you've already identified, that this ballot measure will pass, and will that enshrine the rights to an abortion in the Constitution of Nevada?
Correct. We will have to do another round of it just because of the way that our laws in Nevada work. So we'll have to be on the ballot again in 2026. But if we win this time, we're headed in the right direction. And you're right. We feel confident that if we can get the people we've been talking to get out and vote these last few days, we could potentially win. I say potentially just because I don't want to jinx us, but we feel confident about it.
Mm-hmm. And does that confidence translate to Nevada going blue for the presidential election? Is that your sense as well, or you're just really more confident in that ballot initiative? And hold your response to that question, because I am very curious about what we're seeing in these battleground states. When we come forward, more with KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 things you should know from BIN News. Vice President Harris will host her election night headquarters at Howard University on November 5th, likely in the Harriet Tubman Quadrangle. As an alum and Alpha Kappa Alpha member, she emphasizes her HBCU roots and commitment to mobilizing Black voters in battleground states like Georgia. Clocks will go back 1 hour this Sunday. Daylight saving time ends at 2 a.m. November 3rd and starts again in March of next year. That means an extra hour of sleep. The fight for change continues in Hanover County in Virginia. That's what local civil rights leaders said at a forum hosted by the Hanover NAACP. The meeting was called after a racial slur was found on an Henrico County school bus at a Hanover high school last week. And Black Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is celebrating the Dodgers World Championship and her bet with Black New York City Mayor Eric Adams. The bet requires Adams to wear a Dodgers jersey at City Hall. If the Yankees had won, Bass would have had to wear a Yankees jersey to work. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 at BINnews.com.
In Carson, an accident on the right shoulder at the 405 southbound at Carson Street. Traffic is slow from the 105. It's backed up 40 minutes. And a stalled vehicle in Downey. It's on the center divider at the 105 eastbound before the 605. Traffic is slow from the 405, and that's about an hour delay. And in Encino, an accident on the right shoulder at the 101 northbound after Haskell Avenue. Traffic is slow from Laurel Canyon. It's about a 25-minute backup. In Long Beach, an accident on the right shoulder at the 405 northbound before Cherry. Traffic is slow from Seal Beach. It's backed up 20 minutes. In Santa Monica, slow traffic at the 10 eastbound between 20th and the 5. It's an hour and a half delay.
Black Friday buildup is here at Lowe's. Get up to 35% off select major appliances, plus save up to $500 when you buy select LG major appliances. Valid 10/24 through 11/5 cannot be combined with additional discounts. See Lowe's.com for details and qualifying items while supplies last.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers World Series Victory Parade is scheduled for 11 a.m. Friday in downtown LA. This will be the Dodgers' first parade since 1988. The Dodgers won the World Series in 2020, but there was no parade because of COVID. After the parade Friday, a celebration will be held at Dodger Stadium starting at 12:30. You need a ticket for that event. LA Mayor Karen Bass won her bet with New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Adams promised Bass that he would wear a Dodgers jersey at work on Friday if the Dodgers beat the Yankees. Bass said she is sending Adams his jersey today. Bass was shown at City Hall today wearing a number 43 Dodgers jersey. The Dodgers put the Yankees away in 5 games despite not getting much production from Shohei Ohtani, who will likely be the National League MVP. Ohtani was just 2 for 19 at the plate in the series and had no homers or RBIs. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure at KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Follow the leader when the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Medicare open enrollment is here, and it's a time you can make changes to your health coverage. Yet, watch out for enrollment and marketing scams. Remember, Medicare will neither call you nor solicit your business. Guard your card. Never give out your Medicare number to strangers. Unsolicited calls, door-to-door visits, and emails are prohibited. Take your time. Don't feel pressured to make a quick decision. Report scams to our California Senior Medicare Patrol at 1-855-613-7080.
This is Congresswoman Maxine Waters. You can call me Auntie Maxine. I'm running for re-election to Congress, and Vice President Kamala Harris is running for President of the United States. We both need your support and your vote. Maxine Waters for re-election to the 43rd Congressional District, and Vice President Kamala Harris for President of the United States. What a team. More affordable housing, support for health care for everyone, more capital for small businesses, more full disability for deserving veterans, lower taxes for the average taxpayer, making the big billion-dollar corporations pay their fair share, a criminal justice system that is respectful and fair for everyone, not a system that locks up the little people while too many of the rich and powerful commit crime and don't get convicted. Fairness and justice for all. Yeah, we can do this. This is Congresswoman Maxine Waters speaking truth to power. This is Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and I approve this message.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and I'm talking with Catherine Cohen. She is an attorney with the UCLA Law Center on Reproductive Health Law and Policy, and Erica Castro. She's the Director of Organizing for Plan Action Nevada. We're talking about the impact of reproductive health, reproductive justice on the presidential election. And before the break, Erica, you were saying that you felt pretty confident on a ballot initiative on this ballot in Nevada that will lead the way for enshrining abortion rights in that state into the state's constitution. The polls show that Nevada is neck and neck for Harris and Donald Trump. What does your polling suggest that they're neck and neck? Does your polling suggest that one candidate is leading the other? What are you seeing in the polling that your organization has done, or maybe even polling that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, it's hard to trust polling sometimes. I get flashback to 2016 where polling said, everything was going to be great. And I was out canvassing and things were not great, unfortunately. So I take polling with a grain of salt. I think a lot of the pundits, some of the ones in Nevada, it's a little doom and gloom a little bit. But I think the thing that we have to also remember about Nevada is that we have automatic voter registration since 2019. And that also caused a lot of nonpartisan voters to be registered. So we actually have a very high number of nonpartisan voters that are not being counted in that, or the polling is not being counted as those nonpartisan voters. So I think some of that we also have to take with a grain of salt, that we are expecting some of these voters to go to either side. And that makes, I think, some of the polling a little bit unpredictable. I think I continue to stay optimistic and confident because of the conversations that we're having with people at the doors. And ever since, President Biden stepped down and we saw VP Harris step up and become the candidate, we've seen a lot more momentum. We've seen a lot more engagement, enthusiasm from the community. Obviously, there's still questions and they're concerned about some of the, as I mentioned, economical questions. But I think at the end of the day, what we're counting are the voters, not just the polling, because unfortunately, sometimes the polling also doesn't always poll people that look like me, people who are immigrants, people who are, students or working parents. And those are the voters that we are talking to at the doors.
Yeah, and Catherine, historically, white women have leaned Republican, with Mitt Romney winning white women by 9 points in 2012 and Donald Trump by 6 and 7 points in 2016 and 2020, respectively. But there's some reports out that white women are leaving the Republican Party or are leaving Donald Trump, at least. And one poll out said that he just held a 1 point lead among white women, and that made the weakest showing of any Republican candidate in recent history. What are you hearing, seeing, and what do you think about white women, again, as it relates to this issue of reproductive freedom, reproductive justice? How might they show up in this election?
Mm-hmm. I think the abortion issue is a very motivating issue for all women, for basically all demographics of women, including white women. What we're seeing is that the polling, again, everything Erica said about polling is true of how, how far we can trust it. Though, is that this is going to be a motivating issue and that it is, is particularly driving women, including white women. I think what there can be a gap, however, between the polling for ballot initiatives and people's motivations and how they vote on ballot initiatives and how they vote in the presidential election. And some of that, I think, is what we talked about before, is this distancing of Republican candidates in the presidential election, but I think also in down ballot races as well. People might think, I am opposed to abortion restrictions, but this Republican who I'm voting for is not going to go after my rights, or they can somehow split their vote. I agree with you that it's confusing and complicated to understand that thought process, but we are seeing that actually abortion ballot initiatives outperform Democratic candidates in a lot of the states that we have previously had ballot initiatives. Even in places like California, when we had Proposition 1 on the ballot, it performed better than Governor Newsom's reelection campaign that year. We saw similar things in red states as well, where there were efforts to restrict abortion. They were defeated. And at the same time, people still voted for Republican. So I think that the issue can be motivating, but it might not necessarily translate to the presidential election. And we don't also have a model, like this is the first time we've had abortion ballot initiatives during a presidential election. And so whether or not people are kind of attributing those restrictions to the candidates they're voting on, I think can be an impact. I'd love to say that I think that white women will come out and vote against Donald Trump, but I think unfortunately our history has shown that white women, have voted for Donald Trump in the past. I think he'll probably lose people because of this abortion issue, but I am not necessarily holding my breath for white women to completely reject him just on this one issue.
So one of the polls that's out says that in the swing state of Pennsylvania, there's been an influx of new female Democratic voters. And the fact that they're Democratic probably suggests they're going to vote up and down the ticket for Democrats. Do you see younger voters aren't typically reliable voters, unfortunately. They don't tend to vote in large numbers. Are you seeing anything with respect, Erica, with younger voters? We could look back at the campaigns of Bernie Sanders, was involved in twice, these huge rallies and massive online engagement, but then the voter turnout when he was on a ballot, didn't, it wasn't remarkable. It was kind of with what the historical norm has been. So what are you seeing with younger voters this cycle?
I do think reproductive justice is something that motivates young women. We've done a few like campus takeovers. We were on campus actually yesterday. So we do think this is something that motivates young women voters, especially Black and Latina women. And we're actually seeing that we're expecting that a lot of the Black and Latina women are breaking for Harris for support, which I think that's good. I think the other thing that really motivates young voters right now is climate. That's something that we hear a lot from young voters. They want to make sure that whoever is elected next is someone that's actually going to take the climate crisis seriously. And I think for them, that is part of reproductive justice, because how are they expected to raise a family if they don't know if the planet that they're living on is going to be, sufficient for them? And then I know that Bernie has also been in Nevada, making sure that he supports, this campaign. And Nevada went for Bernie in 2020. So I think there is a lot of motivation there. I think for young voters, though, what we're hearing from them as well is the economic impacts. Are they going to be able to afford to move out of their parents' homes and buy their own homes in the future? Are they going to be able to graduate college and get good paying jobs? So I think for this, it continues to be a really holistic issue. And I do think it's motivating young voters to get out.
What are you seeing, Catherine, amongst younger voters? Again, we place a lot of emphasis, as we should, on voters. Some will be turning 18 for the first, because they've turned 18, will be voting for the first time. Some young voters have only known Donald Trump as the Republican candidate because he's been on the ballot for the last 3 elections. But what are you seeing in your work with respect to younger voters? Are you expecting them to overperform? Because again, every year, or not every year, but every cycle, the numbers tend to shake out pretty consistently.
I think this is definitely the youth vote is the population that is most motivated by this issue. And you see that in the ranking of key issues. It's towards the top for a lot of populations of women, but for particularly this age group of people 18 to 29, this is their motivating issue. We have seen in prior years a slight bump in youth engagement. We've seen, as we've sort of talked about, increased youth voter registration, more young people coming out to vote, both in places that had abortion directly on the ballot, like a ballot initiative in Ohio. There was an increase in youth vote, but also just as this becomes an issue that people are talking about, because it's so motivating. In 2022, we also saw an increase in youth turnout in Pennsylvania that did not have abortion on the ballot, but it was a contentious, issue in their local and congressional elections as well. They want to be represented by people who will support their right to vote or their right to access abortion. And so I think that we can expect to see a slight increase. I agree. It is always hard. It's a hard population to poll. It's a hard population to get out to vote. And there have been over time, especially this election is so contentious, there have been a lot of sort of anti-democratic measures to try to prevent young people of color from voting. And it's a population that it's hard, if you make it that you have to vote in person in the place where you're registered and someone's away at college, that makes it difficult for young people to vote. So it's always difficult to translate polling to actual voting numbers. But I do think it's motivating, and I do expect to see, higher that number to continue to increase.
When we come forward, I want to talk about what is at stake as it relates to reproductive health and justice, and what might a Trump presidency look like, or what might the rights of women look like under a Trump administration, particularly given the flip-floppy nature of his stance on abortion and abortion rights. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580, when we come forward.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Tips to help improve basic steps for building a budget in 2024. Building a budget can help you achieve and reach your financial goals. With a budget, you can keep track of your spending, avoid and get out of debt, limit overspending, pay bills on time, and build solid savings habits. What's the best way to get started? Figure out how much to set aside for expenses like rent, mortgage, bills, groceries, and entertainment. Understanding your past financial habits can help you make the proper adjustments for your budget. Adjusting to a budget can take time as you work to find the right balance, but keep working on it. For more financial health tips, visit chase.com or stop by a local branch. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company. Black Women for Wellness and Stand LA are standing up against harmful oil drilling in South Los Angeles. Our Bad Neighbors campaign exposes the serious health risks of drilling in our neighborhoods. You've seen the billboards, posters, and coffee sleeves around South LA. Now join the movement to protect our health, our families, and our future. Visit bwwla.org/no-drilling to learn more and get involved. That's bwwla.org/no-drilling.
Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. By any other name, we demand environmental justice in 2024 and beyond. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down.
This is Assemblymember Tina McKenna reminding you to vote for my girl, Sade Alawari, for State Assembly. Sade is a part of our community, and she's the partner I need in Sacramento to help fight for economic justice, affordable housing, healthcare, and so much more. Sade is just like us. She comes out of our community, and she's spent years working in our community, bringing people together. That's why she's endorsed by Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, Supervisor Holly Mitchell, teachers, firefighters, and Planned Parenthood advocates. This is Tina McKenna, and I need you to make a plan to vote and to vote by Tuesday, November the 5th, for Sade Alawari for State Assembly.
Ad paid for by Opportunity PAC, a coalition of teachers, nurses, faculty members, school employees, and public and private labor, healthcare, and environmental organizations. Ad committee's top funders, California Teachers Association, not authorized by a candidate or committee controlled by a candidate.
That morning chill means truck season.
5 more minutes.
No snoozing. Do it all in a Chevy Colorado or Silverado, including the class-leading range of the Silverado EV.
Talking to me?
Work, play, hauling, off-roading, a Chevy truck can take it all.
Okay, I'm up.
It's Chevy Truck Season. Get 0% financing on all 2024 Silverado 1500 pickups when you finance with GM Financial. Chevrolet, together, let's drive.
0% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $27.78 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 9.3%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available at least in some of the offers. Take new retail delivery by 10/31/24.
I've treated many homeless patients in the county of Los Angeles. My name is Esme Agonifer. I'm an internal medicine physician. I entered the field of medicine to serve the communities that raised me, and that includes experiencing housing instability. Many people end up on the streets because they have developed serious mental illness. Providing them with resources like Measure A will help move thousands of people out of encampments and into mental health treatment, so they're not a danger to themselves or others. If we don't pass Measure A, homelessness in LA County will increase by 25%. That's thousands more people on the streets, women, children, veterans. That's why Measure A is supported by nurses and doctors like me.
Ad paid for by Yes on A, Neighbors for Affordable Housing and Housing Solutions Now. Ad committee's top funders, California Community Foundation and Western State Regional Council.
Catherine, help us understand what's at stake and what might a Trump presidency look like if indeed he is successful and this issue of abortion rights, he keeps telling us, is going to be left to the states. But what really is at stake?
Yeah, so an abortion ban is absolutely at stake in this election, a national abortion ban. While Trump has tried to distance himself from it, his allies, his prior actions really show that this is something he's considering. As you alluded to, it's not really been left to the state. It's been left to elected officials. I think a lot of people feel that Congress, when we don't have the ability to pass an abortion ban or abortion protections through our federal Congress right now. But the truth is that Trump doesn't actually need to control Congress, and he doesn't actually need a congressionally enacted law to ban abortion. There is this theory about this old zombie law called the Comstock Act. It was something enacted in the 1870s, and it was an anti-obscenity law passed that was by this guy who was very concerned about all sorts of obscenity in the mails. He was concerned that he could get pornography in the mail. He was concerned that people were mailing birth control through the mail. And it also has a provision for abortion. And the position of many people close to Trump, including J.D. Vance, his vice presidential candidate, is that all you have to do is enforce the Comstock Act. And that means that the federal government could make it illegal to ship any instruments used for abortion through the mail. And this could include abortion pills. Abortion pills are used now in 2/3 of abortions in the United States. They have been a lifeline post-Dobbs for getting abortion care to people in banned states. But it could also be read, if they choose, very broadly to be other instruments of care, anything that could be used for abortion care, which often are the same kinds of instruments used for miscarriage care and all sorts of other obstetric care. So it has it could have a really severe impact, not just on abortion care, but on obstetric care and people's gynecological health in general. We've also talked about the Supreme Court. He could add more justices to the Supreme Court. He could, further attack mifepristone that is used in abortion pills, used for medication abortion. That case is coming back to the Supreme Court. We saw it last year, but there was a new recent amendment to that complaint that was filed. And so we're going to see that again. We also saw last year the Supreme Court ruling on emergency abortions and whether people are allowed to get those in hospitals. Those cases are still going on. And the Biden-Harris administration has been defending abortion in those cases. And a future Trump administration definitely would not. And so there's all these kinds of pieces that could be at risk, even if nothing happens through Congress.
So, Erica, Michelle Obama, I think it was last weekend, gave a very powerful speech. I think she was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where she laid out in great detail what's at stake in terms of women's health. She talked about women's menstrual cycles, some of the physical issues that women have that require specialized health care. She talked about abortion care in ways that I don't often hear abortion advocates talk about abortion care and really making the case about how it is really women's health care. How helpful was that? And how come we haven't seen more conversations about abortion care like that? Because listening to her, even people who might have a religious, conviction around abortion, I think may think differently about it if they had that clear understanding of its relationship to overall women's health.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a big part of destigmatizing abortion as a whole when we're talking to voters. And there does need to be more conversations like that. Like you said, as someone who is part of the Latina community, the immigrant community, I know that those are oftentimes tough conversations to have because we are very religious. But I think at the end of the day, like you said, when we're able to break down that this is more than just an abortion, we're talking a little bit about what could happen under a Trump administration. And the reality is that we've seen dozens of states across the country already ban abortions, including Arizona and Utah right around the corner from us. And, I have friends that work at the health centers. I have friends who work at Planned Parenthood, and they've seen the increase of women coming to the state of Nevada seeking health care. And I think when we're able to destigmatize what abortion means, what a reproductive health care means for our communities, and why we're trying to make sure that we're enshrining these protections in our Constitution, but also avoiding national bans, it's going to save lives. Because even with some of the other state bans that we've seen in other states, for example, in Ohio, there was a young girl that was raped, and she had to travel to Indiana to be able to access abortion care. There was another case in Texas where a woman miscarried, and after losing so much blood, the doctors weren't able to give her the care that she needed until she was on a ventilator, essentially. And it's cases like that we're seeing across the country in places that have banned abortions. And when we're able to have conversations like VP Harris was able to have, or her speech, we're able to destigmatize that and really explain to the broader voter network that this isn't just about being able to have an abortion or not. It's literally saving people's lives because they're having access to reproductive health care.
Yeah, Catherine, are you seeing more of a push for conversations like the one Michelle Obama initiated in her speech? Because I've never, I think, heard an elected official, she's not one, obviously, but just even, someone who's a national surrogate speak so honestly in such detail about abortion health care?
I think it's incredibly important. I'm glad we're seeing more of it. I think that for so long, abortion has been, like you've said, Erica, so stigmatized that we've allowed the stigma to drive the narrative. And people think abortion just means, somebody didn't want to be pregnant and there wasn't any, and they're waiting a really long time. There's all these myths, and everybody deserves a right to abortion regardless of their circumstance. But I think what we're seeing from voters is they're recognizing that a complete abortion ban means these people who are miscarrying are not getting the care they deserve, that standards of care are being denied, that OBGYNs are fleeing states like Idaho, and there are just not obstetrics units because the people no longer want to have to deliver care in a criminalized environment where things that you typically do might count as an abortion under these new really extreme laws. And I think it's really unfortunate that it took all of these horrible stories and us to get to this point, to have Roe overturned, to have these bans for people to realize it. But I think what we're seeing now is voters starting to realize this could impact me. This could impact somebody I love. And it's bigger than the way we've talked about abortion in the past. It's tied directly into all aspects of reproductive health. It is healthcare. And I'm glad that people are starting to see that more.
Well, we are 4 days out from this really important election, and it is really, really important that everyone recognizes the power of their vote. A lot of times people say my vote doesn't matter, and they rely on their neighbor, their coworker. They think someone else's vote is going to give them the kind of policies that they want to see in their own personal lives and in their communities. And that's not the case. We all have a civic duty, a civic obligation to engage in the voting process, and not just vote for president and vice president, but also to vote up and down the ballot. There are judges on the ballot, there are district attorneys, there are city council members, there are congressional leaders, there are U.S. senators. There's so much at stake in this election for all voters across this country. So I'm just encouraging everyone, please, please, please exercise your right to vote, and take 5 people with you when you go to vote, or encourage 5 people that you know to vote as well. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much, Erica. The next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
Obamacare. The Louisiana Republican told The Hill that despite Vice President Harris's campaign referring to comments he made at a campaign stop, he never said he wanted to end Obamacare. New details are emerging about the suspect